And then they keep upgrading it. So helpful, isn't that? Okay. So here we are at the uh, the third final session of these dimensions of practice talks. So these three aspects that we've been talking about, sila, samadhi, prajna, or moral integrity, non-distracted, calm abiding, and insight, are like the three legs of a three-legged stool. All of them are required, and they work together. But for the sake of kind of getting a better sense for the whole thing, they're separated in the Dharma. And really, in a certain sense, they can encompass the whole Dharma. So we began, or we've already dealt with the importance of living a life of purpose, of moral integrity, in which we're aligned with our inner sense, and as it were, cultivate our higher angels. And this has dimensions. So we say dimensions of practice. It's not only these three aspects, but the continuum of practice in its deepening, its dimensionality. And so in a rough sense, we can talk about sort of basic practice that's relative to our condition, our everyday condition, where we feel ourselves as being separate beings from being as such. And we live in this vision of self is different and other than the world. Object is different than subject. This is our everyday vision. So we call that, this is relative truth, because everything is relative. Nothing is fixed. And so we begin where we are, or as PannaPrajna famously puts it, you want to start where you are, not where you'd like to be. And so in terms of our moral integrity, we see how much we can trust ourselves. For instance, we see if we have compulsions, whether it's something like gambling, or maybe it's drugs or alcohol or something like this, or various other addictions. I mean, gosh, there's just so many opportunities for going down rabbit holes and then losing ourselves and not being in control. So if that's what we're dealing with, then we have to respect ourselves. We have to respect that we can't really be trusted. And so in that sense, we put a floor that we don't fall through. And we take vows. We make vows to ourselves. So we have something to hang on to, keep us honest. So basic in the Dharma, we say we don't kill, we don't steal, we don't lie. And then you just decide, like, maybe you have to just totally drop something like sex, for instance. This is also, we take basic precepts. And in the most basic sense, it's like, I just can't, I fall in love and then I'm gone. And I just lose myself. So maybe it's better if I just go celibate for a while, for instance. That would be one example. Maybe we do doom scrolling and we just can't help ourselves. So we just make a vow to ourselves, like, enough of that. I'm just going to step away for a time. And then as our practice deepens, we move from having to control our behavior to being able to tune into our intentions that lead to our behavior and our actions. And so to the extent that we can work with our intentions, that we catch things as they're coming up before we act out, then it becomes less important to conform to those vows, to adhere to a vow of behavior, because we don't need to the extent we're able to be responsible at the level of intention. And also, as this deepens, we also realize that we're not in this world alone. that we do want to clean up our own act, but also the people around us begin to really matter. And so then we expand the purpose of our life from kind of self-liberation to also wanting to help others on their paths or in whatever ways their lives maybe need help. And so the from a more self-focused kind of a way that expands to include others. And this is where the bodhisattva vow comes in for instance, that we want to help others in this life. And more, though, what we're talking about is leading a life of noble purpose. And as we're able to do that and put others at the same level as ourselves, or even above us at times, then our integrity totally deepens and we settle more and more deeply into ourself. And when I say self, you understand that doesn't mean ego. That means our true nature. Then there's a development that takes place that's called unbreakable sila, unbreakable moral integrity. We can't harm anybody, including ourselves. We're unable to. It just, you can't do it. It's like, intentionally for most people, putting your hand in the flame. You're not able to do it. And that's called unbreakable sila. And this is corresponds to the way things actually are when we're in total integrity, living from our heart of hearts. Then we can access this unbreakable sila, which is on the level of essential truth, not relative anymore. It doesn't matter what people do to us, we like it or we don't like it, we're not going to react in any case. So that's, in addition to, we also talked about samadhi, collecting ourselves. And again, same thing, there's a continuum. So we begin with a mind's tripping, going, chasing this, chasing that, wandering here, wandering there, and we want to corral that mind. And so to begin that, we start with, it's aided and abetted, facilitated by samatha meditation practice, where we focus on an object of meditation in the beginning. And then we can have the experience of samatha as stillness, mindfulness, and alertness. And so as we're able to sit undistracted, we realize that these are all contained in themselves. Mindfulness, a moment of being mindful, we're automatically still. In being aware of the surround and the context, we're also automatically mindful. So the stillness is held within the mindfulness is held within alertness. And then as the practice continues to deepen and lighten, then we realize the alertness of things becomes even more expansive into spacious awareness. So this also can kind of mark the difference between meditation that's focused on objects. We don't need to do that so much. We can be more aware of the field of awareness, and the objects just are passing through like clouds. We don't focus on the clouds anymore, but we become sky-like in our awareness. This is very of the essence. But we can only have, and it's called, the samadhi at this point is called the supreme samadhi because it's effortless. Also called the samadhi of suchness. Now the thing with this supreme samadhi is we can't get there unless we have our intelligence fully on board. So this brings us to the topic tonight of insight, or the quality of prajna, or panna in Pali. So same thing. There is dimensionality to our intelligence, to our capacity for insight. And so we're not talking in a certain sense, we're not talking about something other than our own ordinary everyday mind. To the extent that we can like gauge distances, we can move through space without like bumping into things. There's a way we're just aware as we move through life. We have this kind of ordinary intelligence, and it's not limited to us. All sentient beings have this. The hummingbirds in my garden, like they just know how to get to the blossoms and the nectar. Nobody has to tell them. They just follow a basic intelligence in their world, according to their vision. We also exist within a human vision, a karmic vision. So in addition to our shared human vision, we also have our idiosyncratic, unique personal vision, right? So something happens and we all have different feelings about that, different experiences of the same thing happened. We see the same thing, but our reaction to it, it can be very, very different. So we're in the relative truth. Everything's relative to our perspective. And our attention is oriented out at objects that we're aware of. So what we want to do in order to have less suffering is to notice how our reactivity is keyed to stuff. And in order to do that, of course, we need to turn attention around. And now we want to cultivate insight. The meditation here that serves prajna is vipassana meditation. Literally, we could say discriminating vision, seeing through. Asana is seen, and V is like discriminating or through, to see through our karmic vision, are the constructs of our world, our reactions to the perceiver of those things, i.e., to awaken. And so we begin our practice of Vipassana, the basic sense, and we have this idea of dimensions. Usually we talk about basic and then more advanced, but we could also talk about superficial to more essential, to deeper, to more essential. Either way, there seems to be some kind of a continuum. And so with the analytic meditation, we then look into our experience and begin to deconstruct it. Rather than taking everything for granted and just being reactive to experience, we start to look into the why and the wherefore of our reactivity. So in the Dharma, there's many pointers that are pointed out, different ways to look into experience to kind of tease it apart. Because normally our experience is very tight. We're all locked up with ourselves. And so what we want to do is we want to make this into this. And then more and more. And that's another, this is like another way of talking about the path from beginning to being locked in, loosening, loosening, opening, opening, open, and then dancing in space. That's the Dakini or Daka, the male one, I call space walker or space dancer. This is somebody who has this capacity to play. But we begin with this analytic style. We look into something, for instance, we can look into the self. Well, there are these three things we really are advised to look into. One is suffering. So the Buddha said life is suffering. Even when we get what we want, we suffer for various reasons. One is it passes. Everything is impermanent. And the other thing is we grab onto it. And then we suffer envy and jealousy and all kind of greed, all kinds of holding on. So even when we have something, it's a source of suffering. We look into that and we find out, is it true? Is that true? Suffering, and then what's the cause of suffering? We can look into that. Really be very careful and specific with our experience. Impermanent, same thing. Is there anything that you can find that's stable, that isn't in the flux, it isn't moving and transforming into something else? Did the Buddha get it right? Is everything impermanent? And then this issue of no self. Well, what about that? Seems awfully solid, right? We have this sense, this self-sense that seems to have endured through time. It seems to be singular, independent. Is it? Are we really singular? What about having mixed feelings, for instance? And are we really islands? Or is it more like we're interdependent with all kinds of things? The air we breathe, whether it's smoky or not, events in the world, how they affect us, and so on and so forth. We can look into these things. We can analyze what's going on. And especially in regard to the self, is there a solid self, or is it made up of constituents, aggregates, such as a body, form, feelings, thoughts, emotions, and then these things that are really hard to pinpoint called samskaras, mental formations, these things that it is said to persist through time and through lifetimes. And sometimes we can get a mood comes over us. So we can look into that and see, oh, I seem to be made up of all these different things. There isn't a solid self. So intellectually, maybe we can accept that. Okay, I get it. Right. No self makes sense intellectually. But emotionally, we don't believe it. Because it feels like we exist as an entity. So that analytic meditation has to be refined, has to deepen. And instead of looking at objects, which are like conceptual things, we need to tune deeper in, underneath the level of concept, to felt sensing, intuiting, where things are squishy, a weird feeling in the belly. This is more challenging. Trying to locate this sense of self, for instance, where could it be? So awareness becomes a bit more refined. And then we may have that experience of the ground falls out. No self, and yet there's still awareness. So this is a way of, we can talk about no self, but also this is talked about in like higher teaching, like Dzogchen, as minor emptiness. We realize there's no self because it's made up of all these elements. But as we look still deeper into those elements, where are they? And if we look deeply enough, we can't find them. And so sometimes then the bottom falls out. And we can have an experience of like existential panic. This means our practice is working. If that happens, the bottom falls out, we can feel terrified. That means we're having a living experience of no self. However, we're not used to it. It's a shock to our system. And so there can be panic, fear. So here we say, at this level of seeing through illusion and being open, maybe we're broken open, such that the self-boundary falls. Now we're having an experience of non-dual reality, because the self-boundary that separated subject from object has fallen down. And so we say what seemed to be dualistic is not two. Not two. The Sanskrit word for this is Advaita. So in other traditions as well, this is recognized. Like in Vedanta, we speak of Advaita Vedanta that recognizes this potentiality, this as a potential actuality. But going still further in the Dharma, into Prajna, there's a thing called Prajna Paramita, which is going beyond Prajna. So when we have this experience of self and world collapse, and yet we're still lucid, we're still there, there's still a subtle sense that we're having an amazing experience. And so that subtle sense of reference, a reference point, is a kind of a self-ground. We thought we've seen through the big self-ground, but now there's a more subtle self-ground. And really, it's just as bad. Because then, we can get like full of ourselves. Because we realize we're seeing something not everybody experiences. And so we can feel special for that, which is a huge trap. And we wind up going back and making, sometimes this is called spiritual bypassing. So it's important to continue to practice, to continue to sit, to continue to deepen. And as we do that, our insight goes beyond content, beyond reference system. Sometimes this is, Prajna Paramita is talked about as transcendental insight or transcendental wisdom, or going to the other shore, the perfection of insight, the perfection of wisdom, Prajna Paramita. So now we can begin to say what Buddhism says that's not so commonly explicit in these other contemplative traditions is not to and not to. It's really opening ourselves to the mystery. And the practice here, so we do a tuning in, we do a deepening. Through the deepening, perhaps we're graced with the vision the Vipassana, the vision of seeing through our constructs, seeing through the self, seeing through things. So now we have emptiness, and this at this point where it's not two and not two, we talk of that, that's spoken of as major emptiness. And the practice at this point is no longer a practice, but it's also non-distract. It's not a distract. We don't wander off into distraction. So it's a practice of letting be, which is quite challenging because we always want to know where we stand, and we want to always have the upper hand, get a little purchase on our experience, have a view. But when prajna thoroughly comes into itself, and it only can do that with the aid of samadhi, non-distraction, yet cognizant, empty, yet cognizant. These are totally together. So now we're saying this is absolute truth. This is also absolute, or actually I'm liking the word more, essence, to talk of this. I think that makes more sense because these words like ultimate or absolute, they're kind of hard to get a feel for me. Whereas essence, now I'm like thrown into myself when I say essence. So I think this is not relative anymore, but essential truth, essential bodhicitta, the awakened mind. As we develop our integrity, we might want to aspire to bodhicitta, to the welfare of all beings, and to the awakened state. But at the mature phase, the essential phase, then we rest. The practice is one of rest. And this is a thing that can be like hard to fathom until you've had a clear taste of it. This is the thing. And the Buddha had his awakening. He traveled to Sarnath, where his old buddies were, his old yogi buddies were. And then he said, I've discovered a luminous truth, deep, calm, abiding, bliss saturated. That's the point of the Dharma. However, we need to begin and work with and respect where we are, be honest with ourselves, and work with our mind as it is, not as we'd like it to be, or as the Buddha realized it. We haven't yet. So we can work with both truths, with relative truth, relative bodhicitta, also with essential truth and essential bodhicitta, if we're hip. There's no problem intertwining these. And it's talked about, this is talked about in Tantra as the union of the two truths. When we have a situation where one's called for, we respect it and we do that. When we have a situation where the other's present, we don't mess with it. We don't still try to be a yogi or a yogini. We relax. The relative one, it might be a good idea to be Buddhist. In the essential sense, we don't want to be a Buddhist. We don't want to bother with that. As a Zen saying is, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him at this point. So these can intertwine. And this is the moment where in Prajnaparamita, That is a moment where we have organically unbreakable sila, totally harmless, open heart and mind. And the samadhi of suchness is is becomes obviously self-existing as long as we're not mucking with it. So that's what I had to say about that. So the other way, this intertwining in Chinese Buddhism, it's also spoken of as having a gradual path, like Soto Zen, for instance, in Japan, and sudden enlightenment, non-gradual. As I was just told by Gary Schneider the other day, is the practice of Renzai Zen. I didn't know that. He's a Renzai practitioner. So there are these two ways, sudden and gradual. Now, usually in the Zen world, you have to really kind of do one or the other. But here, particularly, I'm mainly coming from a Dzogchen point of view. No, you can do both. In Tibetan style, you can do both. Because you really want to be friendly, above all, be friendly with yourself. Find a workable way. And then don't overestimate yourself and don't underestimate yourself. Now I'm really going to stop. So, Marcy, I trust you're on board here. We're going to open it up for questions. Robin, were you going to kind of take over?
Do we have a question in the in-person audience? This is Robin with Mountain Stream. No one have a burning desire? We'll go with the virtual audience. We can see you today.
You don't have to have a question.
Or a comment.
But it's the rule's sort of like this. If you don't have a question, don't fabricate one. But if you do have a question, don't hold it back. Or a comment.
Anyone on the virtual audience have a question or a comment? Priscilla, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Is that the description of the Heart Sutra, the Prajna Paramita experience? Our experience is maybe not a good word, but the description of the.
Yes. Okay. We're having a shock moment here because you came in quite loud over the speakers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not you. It's this squirrely system. Exactly. So emptiness is form. Form is spacious, insubstantial. Feeling is insubstantial. Consciousness is insubstantial. Emotions are insubstantial, empty, open. Insubstantiality, openness, vastness, feels, thinks, has a body, it has bodiness, body embodiments, emotionality to it. This is the Heart Sutra. And so, seen through the self, not to, but also seen through phenomena like form, feeling, and so forth, which are dharmas. So seen through dharmas. So then we say in the Heart Sutra, gate, gate, gone, paragate, totally gone, parasamagate, bodhisvaha, gone beyond even the notion of beyond. Bodhisvaha. Woo! not to, not to. The mind clenches, can't figure that one out. It's beyond the mind. And yet it's experienceable. The Heart Sutra, the Heart Paradox, to really open to this sutra, it's been called the Heart Attack Sutra. The bottom falls out sutra. Yep. Powerful medicine. It's the medicine, as the Buddha said, that cures all illness. Shunyata, empty openness, cures everything. All suffering, gone. In a moment of unconstructed presence, shields totally dropped, down and out. But awareness still alert, vibrant.
Thank you, Ken. Priscilla, did you have a continuation?
I was just curious because this is the rest that they're talking about. Because I'm just,
Hold on, Priscilla.
concerned with
Marcia, can you
rest.
turn it up just a little bit? Now we can't hear Priscilla. She was really loud and then it went real quiet. Sorry, Priscilla.
Do you want me to say it again?
You're
Perfect.
perfect. Yeah,
Good.
please repeat.
Okay, is this the rest that we're talking about?
Well,
Because I'm I guess a little bit confused about the using that word.
yes, for good reason. Because rest can be spaced out. Rest, you can, be on the beach under the sun, right? It can be restful, and a mind's like just dreamy, daydreaming. There's that kind of rest. And then there's practice, which is samadhi, where we've arrived at a calm space through samatha, some form of samatha meditation. And so now we've arrived where the mind is settled and still. So we're still, we're mindful, we're alert. It's all good. And we are having a lovely experience of peace and calm. There's that rest. That's a sign of practice working. But it's not the point. It's lacking lucidity. Vibrant, lively, luminous awareness. Vipassana. So then we look into, in a calm abiding, we look into who is calmly abiding. We have to turn that around and see. There's nothing to see. No one's there, but everything is here. Then, in that unfindability, groundlessness, rest. That's the rest I'm highlighting here at the essence of practice. There's that rest. or there's nothing more to meditate on because it's vanished. This kind of a question, Priscilla. These are the kind of questions that are really relevant in something like a non-dual practice, like Mahamudra or Prajnaparamita or Dzogchen. Otherwise, what we're really content to do, what we really maybe need to do is cool our jets, because we're so caught up in compulsive thinking and emotional reactivity all the time. We're buzzing here and there. We need to cool that out because we're just spending our lives, literally spending our time, wasting our time in an essential sense. And so we need to collect ourselves. And so we'll have a meditation where we keep our mind on an object so that we don't just disperse ourselves and lose another hour of our life. We draw that in, we focus that in. And then just by the basic Theravada practice. I mean, I'm coming from Dzogchen, but you can just follow the Theravada practice. And all of this will reveal itself. It's maybe not talked about, it's not explicated, but it is implicit to the practice. Supreme Samadhi, unbreakable Sila, Prajna, Panna. I don't know in the Pali how they might talk about Prajnaparamita, but I do know that it's there. It's certainly there. The only thing is, it takes time. It's a slow, steady road. Safe, dependable. You won't get lost. When you start upping the ante, like doing a practice, for instance, like Tonglen, a Mahayana level practice, it's more difficult because rather than sitting quietly and like waiting for a defilement to appear, an obstruction to appear, a fixation to arise on its own good time, you go after it, you go looking for it. And sometimes you have to, because you're so upset. This was how I came to Tonglen. I was so upset during a vicious divorce and custody battle that I went to the Tonglen, and that's where you breathe in, you go for it. You breathe in the difficult, the painful, and you breathe out the relief, what you need to be free. And so this is counterintuitive, breathing in the dark stuff and letting out the light. It's more difficult. And also you have to be careful that you don't get into a codependent thing. We're going to be doing more of this Tonglen, which is nested within the Lojong Mahayana practice. We're going to do a full day of the absolute bodhicitta. And then in September, then we're going to do a couple nights of the relative bodhicitta. But we'll talk more about that. But it's a steeper path. And then when you go to something even more light, more paradoxical, like the Prajnaparamita, the Heart Sutra, you go that way, or into Mahamudra or Dzogchen, it gets more and more delicate. And so it's considered, in old Tibet, for instance, to go into Dzogchen in particular, you had to have a really good foundation because they were secret teachings, and they were only revealed to people who already had done a lot of purification practice on the front end. But we live in dire times. dire straits. Our world is hurtling crazily fast. Everything's speeding up. And so the prophecy was, when we come to the samsara gets itself worked up into a froth like it is now, Dzogchen in particular would not, because it was secret, very quiet, kept for the elite few, Dzogchen would burst forth like a forest fire, like a supernova. And it seems that this is the time for that my teachers open this up to regular people without having to have a foundation. And I can tell you, since I've been at this Dzogchen style since 1980, I've participated in this. I've seen many people do it. And without a foundation, it can be hard to get traction and you can fool yourself. So it's one thing that I really respect about the Vipassana world is there's a discipline. You don't have to realize yourself as an arhat or anything, but just to have this discipline of self-attention is, I consider it mission critical. It is for me. And so, but on that basis, if you're drawn, then there's ways to accelerate the loosening, the opening. But it does require becoming increasingly more vulnerable, daring more and more undefended presence. So there's this spectrum, this dimension of practice.
Do we have a question from the in-person audience?
I'm Merle. I didn't know you went through a divorce, so that was helpful. I was struggling with even going to ask a question. I heard a story about Thich Nhat asking the Sangha to talk to one of the fellow monks about some of the questioning he would question and overly question or something with Thich Nhat Hanh. And so they took him aside and tried to converse with him and convince him and that, that the teachings were this way and what was stopping him or was it that he didn't understand. And it ended up that this monk isolated one of the monks and flicked water in his face. And the one monk that happened to did get very angry, but didn't express it and got up out of the room and he left. And then he eventually, without telling anybody, they had all decided that they would have to ask him to leave. And I feel that way about coming to this Sangha, that this Sangha has become so truth-telling for me and such a path for me. And then I have this oil and water situation at home. Where water is being flicked in my face, literally, regularly. And the person is definitely immature and young and trying to run. And I'm trying to hold her while I'm being flicked in the face. And I don't have traction. And so I just wanted to hear, I don't have the tools. It's seeming to me I'm completely, totally beside myself. And again, losing sleep again, which is dangerous for me. So I'm also having my own health issues. So yes, so I'd just like to hear, since this is where I come for truth and where I'm not mixing oil and water, doesn't feel like. So thank you.
So moral, you can trust that broken, open heart. This is the Mahayana level. It's explicit there. This is the Tonglen. This is good. This is wholesome. This is your genuine. You're impacted, and you're not closing that down. That's the way forward. Befriending yourself, number one. And so you're hurting. And so to acknowledge that and to then cuddle up underneath the storylines. Because the mind can then start thinking and reviewing and repeating and on, so you get into a vicious circle. Do your best to relax all that. Go back to the emotions, how it feels, how bad it feels. This is the Tonglen. You breathe in underneath the storyline, lose the storyline, underneath the storyline, into the quick, into the felt sense, the body. Tune in. And then like a wave massaging it, breathe into it, let it go. Breathe into it, let it go. That's the Tonglen practice. Yeah. And then, like always, we do muddle on through. Okay. So I think we're going to leave there. Going to just dedicate the merit before Robin gives announcements. So, by the merit we've generated here tonight, may we obtain a deeper wisdom and more decisively dispel our conflicting emotions. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and its causes. May they never be parted from happiness, free from sorrow. May all beings be free of attachment, aversion, and indifference, and remain in great equanimity, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, and real, heartfelt compassion. May all beings everywhere be free.